Nice to be with you. I'm Tracy Bettenhausen. The Environmental Protection Agency has released new rules on a number of fronts: greenhouse gas emissions, mercury, and coal combustion residuals. Reliable electricity is critical for Basin Electric's membership, and these new rules would force the cooperative to install unproven technology or retire power generation facilities on an unrealistic timeline. Erin Dukart is Director of Environmental Services and explains the rules for greenhouse gases.
The recently finalized greenhouse gas rule is very restrictive for both new generation options using natural gas as well as the existing coal fleet. New simple cycle units on natural gas would be limited to a 20% capacity factor. Combined cycle units that were not installing carbon capture technology would be limited to 40% capacity factor. And a combined cycle that is planned to run more than 40% of the time would need to install carbon capture capable of 90% capture. On the coal side, EPA created two sections, both a medium term and a long term, depending upon how long the units were planned to run. There's also an exemption included. So if units are willing to close before January 1st, 2032, they are exempt from the final rule. If a unit is willing to close before January 1st, 2039, EPA has determined that the best system of emission reduction is co-firing with 40% natural gas, and therefore those units would have to meet an equivalent emission factor. Long-term units that are going to operate beyond 2038, EPA has decided that the best system of emission reduction is 90% carbon capture, and therefore any unit operating within that time frame would need to meet an emission limit equivalent to 90% carbon capture, which currently is not feasible. Basin Electric has done some preliminary analysis to see what the implications of this final rule would be. And initial compliance within the first 10 years would cost Basin Electric about $10 billion just to install the technology, as well as the replacement generation that would be needed for units that are retired or that have lost generation due to that technology. By 2045, it would cost Basin Electric about $14 billion just to comply with this rule alone.
Basin Electric is joining with others to fight these rules. The cooperative, together with National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, other G&T cooperatives, the Lignite Energy Council, and the 27 states, including most states in our service area, are suing the EPA. The lawsuit was filed on May 8th by the states, and a request to stay or pause the rule was filed on May 13th. Mark Foss is Senior Vice President and General Counsel. He says the timeline outlined by the new rules is impossible to meet, and it would be impossible to undo the harm that would be done to Basin Electric's members and reliable power if we would try.
The biggest thing we pointed to is you've got to submit or make your elections with respect to the coal plants so that a state can prepare its state implementation plan, and then that is what goes to EPA. And we don't think that the litigation without a stay would be finalized by the time we would be making an irrevocable election to close facilities. Again, making decisions years ahead of time before the litigation was over. And so I think to us that's what we hang our hat on, the fact that we would be making irrevocable decisions to close facilities that we probably otherwise wouldn't think about for years, if not decades.